Good morning, ecologists. It is a cloudy Thursday. I'm recording this the day before I release it, as I do sometimes. This is my weekly personal log entry, where I talk about things that are on my mind, issues that I care about, and just things that I feel like need to be put out in the world. One of the reasons I started this YouTube channel was as I came to realize that there's a very real possibility that this life is all that I get. It's all that any of us get. That this life as we know it, we Homo sapiens, which we are complex organisms, right? This idea of the self, that there's some ethereal self called Richard that exists separate from this complex organism called the human body, it's a myth. Like the idea of the soul, or even as we might talk about it now, consciousness. It's something we're studying. It's like in neuroscience, I guess it would be considered, and I may be using the wrong term here, but an emergent property of the brain and how the brain operates. But the brain doesn't operate separate from the rest of the body, like the entire nervous system, like everything contained within the body. It's all interconnected. It's a complex organism made up of so many moving parts and individual cells. And in a very real sense, the universe itself is a complex organism. But certainly our Earth and the biosphere in which we move and operate, the oceans, and even down below the soil and things, like it's a complex organism. And it's one that we Homo sapiens, we're messing around with the way it functions. We consume so much. I was listening to an NPR radio discussion yesterday about the twofold problem of population growth. Over the last 100 years, the human population has grown exponentially at a faster rate than it has literally in the entire history of our species. Like, if indeed we've been around for 200,000 years, as I talked about in my last video, the last 100 years has seen, like, it took us 200, I think what the number they threw out yesterday was 250,000 years to get to our first billion residents, so to speak, our first billion members of our species. And within the last 200 years, since the onset of roughly the Industrial Revolution, our use of fossil fuels and such, we have seen a tenfold. Was it tenfold? We've gone from 1 billion to, we just surpassed 8 billion this past year in 2022, late 2022. We blew past 8 billion, and we're now 8 billion and rising. Now, in developed countries like mine, like the United States of America, birth rates are going down, like they're lower, which is actually a good thing. Death rates are higher than birth rates. In terms of population growth, that's actually a good thing, because resources are limited. There's only so much energy. Like the sun's energy, the energy that reaches our planet, is the driving force behind the existence of life in this biosphere in which we live. Now you go down to the deep ocean, you have chemosynthesis, which is not dependent, as far as we know, on the sun's energy. But up here, everything is dependent on it. But there's a limited amount that reaches us every day, as the Earth goes through its cycles, as we orbit around the sun, as the Earth spins on its axis. We receive the sun's radiation. There's a limited amount. And whether it's plants, whether it's mammals, other organisms, insects, like, we're all competing for our own share of that energy, the energy that we need as discrete organisms to survive. And so you get organisms like us humans, who are over-consuming. We're using far more than we need. We're using and transforming far more of those resources than we need to survive. The idea of building wealth, the idea of extending our natural lives, if you will. When it comes to, like, electricity that we use to power our houses. Like during the winter, that's important. It keeps us warm. It does limit the number of deaths. But we're also consuming resources that other species could use to survive. Now, at the end of the day, if you, for all competing, it's like for one species to succeed, another inevitably has to die or suffer loss. I mean, that's just the way of the world. When you have limited resources, nothing you can do about that. It is a competition. But because we're intelligent enough to be aware of the fact now that that competition is happening, and that we now have an unfair advantage over many, many species, and we are causing, in a sense, an artificial increase in the deaths of species because of our overconsumption, because we're wasteful, we're over-consuming, and we're careless in how we gather resources. It's one of the reasons I stopped eating seafood this past year. I think I've only had it once or twice in the past year. Like, since I saw the Netflix documentary Seaspiracy, which I recommend you view, and I've just been following ever since. I've been following both their channel and other channels that talk about the need to protect ocean life, like overfishing, and even our oversea cargo lanes and things like that are killing so many, needlessly killing so many animals, so many mammals, whales. It's estimated that some 20,000 whales are killed just by getting hit by these massive boats. So I think we need, honestly, like our trade needs to get less global. We need to go back to the way we used to live just a couple hundred years ago. We were much more localized. Our economies were much more localized. They were less consumer based. They were more about subsistence. They were more about just, gathering enough resources to survive, right? And at the end of the day, like, the only things we really need, we need food, clothing, shelter, and community. That's it. Like, we don't need big cars. We don't need fancy jets. We don't need massive houses. We don't need billions of dollars in wealth. The bare bones that we need, to survive, and I would argue even to have a happy life, is, food, clothing, shelter, shelter from harsh elements, right? And in community with one another. That's it. That's it. That's the bare bones. That's all we really need. And we have added so much to that, and so much of our economy now is based on consuming. Consuming. I say that as I sit inside a vehicle. Now, this is a used vehicle, so it had been owned by, I think, at least one other person for roughly 8-9 years before we purchased it, my family. And in general, like, number one, it's better for my budget, if you will, my family's budget. It's much cheaper to buy used, whether that's used clothes, whether that's used, computers. Like, the last several cell phones and computers I've purchased have all been refurbished. This is a used vehicle. I've never bought a new vehicle. I was just thinking earlier today, as I was listening to the radio and thinking about these issues and driving around, I was like, why are we still making new cars? Why are we still making new cars? I understand that some of it is we have this drive that we have to get better, better cars, more efficient, and right now there is some genuine need for that. We need to transition to alternate fuel sources, which does necessitate designing and making new vehicles. And realistically, we can't just cut off all car use. We can't just shut that off, because too many people would die. In other words, too much of our economies are based around that, so it has to be gradual, unfortunately. But one thing we do definitely need to do is stop making internal combustion vehicles. We need to stop that, which a lot of companies are moving in that direction, which is a good thing. Volvo is one example. They have made a commitment to go full electric with their their consumer vehicles. They're moving that direction with their commercial vehicles as well. I have a friend who works in that side of the business, and they're also moving in that direction. Ford, I think, has made similar commitments of like a lot of modern automotive. But then my question would be also is like, what kind of commitments to sustainability are they making with the other components that make up their vehicles, like the other resources, the metals that they source? Are they making similar commitments about stopping use of petroleum-based plastics, for instance, things like that? There are alternative sources, and I'm not naive enough to believe that we can just automatically stop all usage of plastic and switch over to things like, say, wheatgrass-based plastics, which I don't even know if you can technically call it plastic, but it's a similar. Like my daughter's lunchbox is made out of this. They used wheatgrass rather than petroleum to make a substance that's similar to plastic. It's very similar to plastic, and thankfully that there are companies are starting to make additives. They are starting to make plastics that break down easier within the soil. They don't. But even so, like, I don't know that you can eliminate the problem of microplastics that can remain for our estimates. At this point, plastic hasn't been around that long, so we haven't actually been able to directly observe this for 500 years. But the estimates are that some plastics will take 500 years to break down, and obviously that's an extrapolation based on the current rates of decay, if you will, of the plastics. But yeah, we're over consuming, and I'll admit, like, a lot of days when I think about this, I just get really discouraged and I feel tired and exhausted. And granted, part of that's because I have 4 young kids. I'm just tired a lot of the time. But I realize that the importance of taking action, and I try to make choices. I mean, one that I've gotten into a regular habit of is, like, I rarely use plastic bags at the grocery store anymore. Like, I go in and I get the groceries, I fill up my cart. I've got a good system down now, and honestly, it's helped me to be more active as a person as well, which I kind of like that. So I go in and I get all my groceries, which family of 6, so I fill that cart up. I go to the self-checkout, and I pull as much off as I can onto the conveyor, and then I just scan it all through and then put it back in the cart. Don't use any bags if I can help it, unless there's something like exceedingly fragile or loose that I just have to, occasionally I might use one bag, and that's it. But in general, I put it all back in the cart after I scan it. Then I go out to my car, where I have reusable bags that I bring with me, and I put everything in the reusable bags, and I take it home, and then I put it away. Does it add extra steps? Yes, but the upside of that, like I said, it actually gives me some physical exercise. I'm there scanning everything myself, putting it back in the cart. It adds extra steps, but that is actually a form of exercise for me. This is kind of the way I've come to look at it. It's really, and I've gotten in the rhythm of it. It's not that inconvenient. I'm used to it now. And it helps to keep, these plastic bags. Like, the more use goes down, the more production will go down. That's just basic law of supply and demand. The less demand there is, the less plastic bags that will be made. The more people buy reusable bags, the more people that refuse to use plastic bags, the less that will be made, because the industry won't be sustainable if they can't sell them. If they're not being used, by customers at Walmart, Walmart is eventually going to decrease the amount that they purchase, right? Hopefully they'll decide to do that regardless of whether people want to keep using them. They'll just cut off use of that and offer alternatives. And they're slowly doing that. They're slowly offering more alternatives, which is good. But yeah, we need to get away, because a lot of those sadly end up in the ocean, and they end up killing a lot of sea life, and it's just not good. Like, from what I've heard, now I've not seen it in person, but there is it's almost like another landmass. It's floating in the Pacific Ocean. There's like this dead zone where it all tends to collect, and it's like the size of France. just plastic floating out there. Whereas used fishing nets is one of the biggest problems, but then single-use plastics like plastic grocery bags or like plastic water bottles. Coca-Cola and Pepsi obviously are big perpetrators of this thing. They continue to make plastic bottles for their sodas. I know they do the aluminum as well and the glass, but plastic is still used frequently in their bottling endeavors. As well as, water bottle companies, things like that. So it all ends up back in the ocean. Not all of it, but like a lot of it does. Like, in the percentage of stuff, even that goes to the recycling plant, the percentage that actually gets recycled and put back in to circulation is fairly low. It's sadly a lot lower than you might think. I think I've heard some estimates. It might only be 20% of what we send to the recycling plants gets fully recycled and then reused, which is very sad. A lot of it just gets thrown back into the landfill or dumped in the ocean by countries that are less conscientious than ours about that. And we're just doing so much damage to the ecosystem. And again, it's driven by two things. Number one, it's driven by consumers like you and me who make the decisions to buy these things, to use these things. But number two, it's driven by the manufacturers who, because they want to make more money, hire more people, grow, more locations, more employees, more stock, more revenue, more. They're trying to drive up demand through marketing. They're trying to create demand for their product through marketing. And I would say if it's a product that doesn't help someone, if it's not, doesn't meet a basic need, like food, clothing, shelter, community, like building community, if it's not directly related to one of those basic needs, why are we making it? Why? It doesn't really, like, with the exception of some things in the medical realm, like there's not a lot of it that improves our quality of life. Some of the things do, but if it doesn't help you to survive and it doesn't significantly improve your quality of life, why are we making it? Such a waste. And it's this grow, more, money. And it's just a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle. And we need to stop. I say this to marketing firms or marketing departments, people in that field. Like, don't go to work for a company that makes cheap, if you can at all avoid it, that makes cheap, useless shit that no one needs, that doesn't improve anyone's quality of life. Don't work for a company like that. Don't try to create artificial demand for something that no one actually needs. Don't do it. Just don't do it. Don't go to work for them. At the end of the day, if no one works for them, they can't make anything. Like, refuse to work for companies. Like, if at all possible. I know there's some circumstances where you got to provide for your family. You might not have a choice. It might be the only game in town, so to speak. But that is increasingly not the case. So yeah, it's just this overconsumption is a big problem. And according to the experts they had on yesterday on the NPR, it's a bigger problem for the environment than overpopulation. The population growth is slowing down from what they were saying. But consumption is not. Consumption is increasing. The rate of consumption, particularly for developed countries like mine, is going up. And it's not good. That's not good. It gives the illusion of wealth or happiness. As most people know who collect a bunch of stuff, it doesn't really improve quality of life at the end of the day. There's a saturation point. In other words, you get up to a certain point of stuff, and then it doesn't make your life any better. same with income. You get above a certain income level, studies show that I think it's somewhere around, like in America, based on like the cost of living and everything, it's somewhere around 100,000 a year household income. Families that get above that, there is a direct correlation between like happiness and quality of life, up to $100,000 a year. You get beyond that, then the more you make, it doesn't. There's not a corresponding increase in quality of life or happiness or satisfaction. Because we just need enough to meet our basic needs, to provide for emergencies, and to be able to pass some things on to the next generation. Some generational wealth, like owning a house or having some land or some assets. Just enough to help the next generation get off on the right foot and meet their needs. And that's it. That's all we really need. So in that sense, like, even though where it came from was this weird apocalyptic myth, I am grateful for just the general ethic I was taught within Christianity of not loving the idea of getting rich, like not loving excess, of being content with just what you need to meet your basic needs, and just be content with that. Jesus taught that, and that's actually a good thing. Now, again, it was within an apocalyptic framework where he thought that the world was going to end before that century was over, which obviously he was wrong about that. But nevertheless, there's some value in that. And then other wise men, so to speak, people like the Buddha have taught similar principles, even back before Jesus ever did. So he's certainly not the only one or the last one to teach that. But that's where I learned it from in many ways, myself. And there's still some value in that. Again, the reason for it, some of the reasons for it are not necessarily good. And I don't believe that Yahweh is going to come in and provide for my needs. Like, I don't think Yahweh exists. Never did. He was a fabrication of human imagination. It's one of the reasons I'm not a Christian anymore, is that came to realize, based on the evidence that I saw, that the God represented in the founding document of Christianity, i.e. the Bible, never existed. He was never more than a figment of human imagination, and in truth is more like an amalgamation of multiple people's imaginations, a synthesis of multiple ideas and traditions, and you'll find almost as many perspectives on him as there are denominations within the Christian church as there are Christians, So there's just so many different versions. At the end of the day, I was like, no, this is a product of human imagination. At the end of the day, like, we made this up. So no, I don't think that person's going to be like, I'm going to take it. No, we have to take action ourselves, do everything we can, provide for ourselves, our wife, our kids, our families, those we care about. So let's do that, and let's do so with consideration for the welfare of other sentient organisms in our planet, and even the welfare of organisms that we might not necessarily consider sentient, or at least that have lower levels of sentience. So yeah, that's my 20 cents for the day. You know me, I always give more than 2 cents. But that's kind of what's on my mind, and for this week, and hope it has given you some food for thought. If you want to argue with me, or let me know what you thought, or agree with me, or whatever, let me know down in the comments below. And yeah, so that's it. So with that, I'll say peace to you, my fellow humans. Stay curious and be healthy.